Delighted to welcome to the podcast Vish Burra. Vish is a journalist. He's done some really cool things with Steve Bannon. He's actually present and part of the Hunter Biden laptop story, which is what we're going to talk to him more about today. So, Vish, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Danielle. It's always a pleasure.
Oh, great. Well, I'm very excited to talk to you because we've been talking a little bit today about the Twitter story, about Elon Musk kind of revealing this information regarding Hunter Biden's laptop and the suppression of that whole story. But I wanted to talk to you because you had a very pivotal role in this and a very kind of like behind the scenes role, but was a really big part of the laptop being discovered and the information being published. And I know that we have like a lot of like mutual friends involved in the same story, but I wanted to have you on so you could tell us a little bit just about kind of how did you get pulled into this? How did you first find out about the laptop?
Yeah, so at the time, around August to September of 2020, I was working on the War Room podcast with Steve Bannon. I was his producer. And at that time, he had just been arrested on the boat, remember, and there was that issue during 2020, which he was pardoned for. And after he came back out, he looks at me and he says, pack your stuff. We're going to New York. We don't know when we're coming back. And so we're, living in this hotel by St. Patrick's Cathedral for almost 2 months. And, in the first week that we're there, I'm driving him back and forth to Rudy Giuliani's place all day. And I'm just like, hey, what's going on? What are we doing? What's the operation up here? And he said, look, you can't tell anybody, but I think we have Hunter Biden's laptop. And at which point I said, hey, Steve, I used to be a software professional before I got into politics, before I got into any of this stuff. So if you need help with, the laptop, I'll see what I could do, And at which point he was like, you know what? He got me a copy of it and then said, make this thing your best friend. And I eventually, become the sort of chief navigator for him of the laptop. And I also end up learning how to make a copy of it. So I've become one of the people that is actually able to create more copies of this and distribute more copies of this as well. So in that time, as I'm helping him we had the laptop and there's a ton of information, right? 250 gigabytes worth. But we only have about 2 months before the election happens, and we are essentially trying to create an October surprise. And so while we're in Manhattan, basically extracting and researching the information that's available on the laptop, I called it the Manhattan Project because we were essentially creating a nuclear political weapon. We needed to, once we had the stories that we thought were there, which was originally the Ukraine story, then there's the bigger China story, and then there's obviously all the lewd pictures and all that controversy of, I guess, his off-field activity, Hunter Biden's off-field activities. But once we got to the point where we had the stories ready, working with Steve, working with Rudy, working with Bernie Carrick, that's when we had to figure out how are we going to deploy this information into the actual ether, and that's Steve's first strategy was let's go to the Daily Mail, which the Daily Mail gets the most clicks online. And so that would be the best sort of nonpartisan avenue to publish that story. When the Daily Mail contact that we had basically said, no, I'm not going to run with this story, that's when we were faced with a problem. Where else can we go that would make this story believable?
Right.
And so now when that happens at the time, I am thinking, how can we solve this problem? And I remember and her name is Emma Jo Morris. And at the time, Emma Jo Morris was the deputy politics editor at the New York Post. And I had met her previously about a couple of years before that while I was a software professional, while I was just posting memes on Facebook. We randomly added each other on Facebook. And she's like, I love your memes. They're based, they're esoteric, they're all this stuff. And we should meet up and hang out. And we immediately became best friends. And she was working on Hannity's show at the time. So I turned around to Steve. I said, hey, do you have any problem with publishing it in the New York Post? He said, no, actually, I'm open to that. I was like, look, I got a friend named Emma Jo Morris. She's really good. We can trust her. Why don't we pitch it to her? And he said, are you sure we can trust her? I was like, Steve, she's on our side. We're good. And that's when he's like, okay, send me your number. I texted Emma like, hey, Bannon's about to call you. You need to pick up. And that's when, Steve basically calls her and says, I got the story of a lifetime. And the rest is history, right? Now, it's just Emma Jo Morris is one of my dear friends, and she's so brave for even going through with this story. And there was a whole lot of consternation that she went through just in trying to validate the story and just trying to come to a state of being able to believe it enough to put her name on it and publish it through one of the oldest newspapers in America. People forget that the New York Post is a 200-year-old institution that was founded by Alexander Hamilton, one of our nation's founding fathers. And so, people don't realize that there was a lot that still went behind validating the whole thing. And Emma Jo Morris and Miranda Devine were at the forefront of pushing that through New York Post.
So